I remember Geoff Goodfellow from walking through Rundle Mall as a student, hearing the defiant recitations from our very own street bard from afar. He is the living embodiment of an Adelaide legend. He has been writing poetry for over 37 years, across that time being a poet in residence at universities, high schools, and even the odd jail. He is a proud public voice for those living close to the margins, and after publishing 9 volumes of poetry, in 2020 he published his first prose book, the memoir Out of Copley Street, A Working Class Boyhood. Geoff.
Thank you. Well, anyone that has read Out of Copley Street will know that I started work at 5 years of age, and my paper tonight is called A Working Poet in the Time of COVID. Nobody likes a whinger. In March 2008, I had a major neck dissection following a February diagnosis of cancer. And in my household and among my family and close friends, those words quickly became a mantra. On the evening of Sunday, 15th of March 2020, I was eating dinner at the Launceston home of poet Tim Thorne, one of the generation of 68. Tim is still recovering from cancer. At around 6:45 p.m, I received a phone call from Sharon Beattie, head of English at the prestigious Scotch Oakburn College, where I was scheduled to appear the following day to perform my poetry and conduct writing workshops. Sharon explained that a student at the school had been exposed to coronavirus and the school was shutting down. My visit had to be cancelled. Sharon explained, though, that I was not to be disadvantaged by this late notice. She invited me to meet her, along with her English faculty, at a cafe near the school at 1 p.m. Monday for lunch. She instructed me to bring an invoice, stating I would be paid in full and that my lunch would be an added bonus. On Monday morning, the head of English at St Patrick's College phoned to cancel my Tuesday at their school, and like Scotch Oakburn, they too would pay my full fee. My daily bookings for the remainder of the week kept falling like autumn leaves, and with every cancellation, fees were not an issue. I largely spent that week in isolation in my motel room. On Friday, 20th of February, I flew home as per my original travel plans. My daughter Grace picked me up from the airport at 9 p.m. and drove me home to Semaphore. Throughout the drive, she rammed home the fact that not only was I in the vulnerable age group, but that my chronic disease status reinforced the need for me to self-isolate. Grace instructed me to close my 5-foot-high gates, and that under no circumstances was I to leave the property. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You can wander around the garden, but you don't go out the gates." Before leaving, she told me to email her with a detailed shopping list twice weekly and mentioned she would attend to getting some backup from her brother, Paul. Anyone who knows Grace knows that she would not take transgressions against her direct orders lightly. Being fully aware that nobody likes a whinger, I did stick by her instructions. The following day, I emailed her with my first list. I wanted seedlings: broccoli, collie, Lebanese cucumbers, beetroot, lettuce and spinach. I also wanted 2 packets of carrot seeds, one of atomic red and one of heirloom. Grace is a dutiful daughter and went to the garden centre for me that very morning. She later reported that the seedling shelves resembled the toilet roll shelves at the supermarket. She did finally manage to scrounge a few half packets of seeds from her close friends. I propagated some of those seeds in egg cartons, placing them on top of a cabinet in my dining room, directly in front of the window where they'd get plenty of sun and natural light. I sprayed them with misting spray a couple of times a day, willing them to pop, but nothing much was happening. I began to wonder how I might otherwise occupy myself through this daughter-imposed isolation. Michael Boland from Wakefield Press had been on to me for months, years even, to complete the boyhood memoir I had slowly been compiling. With the 5-foot gates closed, I began working at a manic pace, and within a week had emailed him the completed manuscript. This has now become Out of Copley Street, A Working Class Boyhood. It carries cover endorsements from the Queen and King of Auslit, Helen Garner and Tim Winton. With the manuscript at Wakefield, I went and checked on the egg cartons. Very little was happening. I kept whispering to them in my little boy's voice, "Please grow." But they didn't hear me. Or maybe they were just being disobedient or plain stubborn. I didn't raise my voice because I knew nobody likes a whinger. I then thought about the poems I had in different coloured folders. How I'd often be at a school, wondering if the next poem I wanted to read was in the red folder or the blue, or was it in the white? But perhaps it was in the orange. I recognised that if I emptied all of the folders of their contents, I could sort the poems into a more usable order. As I sorted through them, I recognised that a word could be excised here and there. Slight changes could be made. And as I worked through that pile, I recognised that a poetry manuscript was forming before me. On one of her morning grocery drop-offs, Grace kindly assisted me with the initial ordering of those poems. After another fortnight of manic working, tweaking the poems, I was able to deliver the manuscript of Preparing for Business. The collection was published to coincide with 2021 Adelaide Writers Week and carries a cover endorsement from Hunters and Collectors frontman, the legendary Mark Seymour. Meanwhile, the seeds in the egg carton had started to burst, but the ground outside was still far too cold to consider transplanting them. I walked a few laps to the garden, wondering how I might otherwise occupy myself. I thought about the verse novella I had begun years ago. It's a heavy-duty account of people living difficult lives in outer suburbia. All the evils are included: drug and alcohol abuse, sexual abuse, teenage pregnancies, pokey addiction, generational poverty, incarceration, poor educational outcomes, and much more. It sounds quite drastic, but it's not without hope. I'd taken the unfinished draft with me to Tasmania pre-COVID. I'd read a huge slab of it to boys in the Ashley Youth Detention Centre. The boys listened. They loved it. They said it sounded just like them and their families. It's harrowing and traumatic, just like their lives. I left the tranquility of my garden and went upstairs to my office, where I proceeded to pull all the A4 sheets of the verse novella out of their plastic sleeves. What had been holding me back? Within 30 minutes, I'd thought up some drastic changes, and then I was underway. I worked until 2:30 a.m. the first morning and was up at it again at 6:30 a.m. I hammered away for another 2 weeks, day and night. During that time, I read it privately to people who knew and understand the subculture I set out to harness. I saw people cry, and I cried with them. That manuscript too may well be published in 2021, providing I can find a suitable publisher. What I'm saying is that throughout COVID, I've produced 3 manuscripts. The isolation has forced me to think and consider lives other than my own. I've been mainly stable throughout this global instability. I've had a few health issues to confront, but I'm a septuagenarian now, and health issues are hardly surprising. But I'm facing up to them. Throughout February, I've had a CT scan, an MRI, X-rays and ultrasound, and spent half a day in the nuclear medicine department at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. For 21 years, I've travelled to Tasmania, generally from mid-February to mid-March. They've been working tours, visiting schools, colleges, Risdon Jail and the Ashley Youth Detention Centre, performing my poetry and conducting writing workshops. I've sometimes seen people of enormous privilege. More often, though, I've seen battlers and survivors and their offspring. What I do when I go to work is show people how to use their voice, show them language as power. I talk to them about how physical power changes nothing, how real power exists in the effective use of language, even simple language. To arrange these annual tours takes a lot of strategic planning. This usually begins in November. For my 2021 tour, I took a punt on the fact that the virus was going to be under control by the end of 2020. I also took a punt on the fact that my own health was going to allow me to undertake another of these arduous tours. My old mate Louis backs gallopers every Saturday. It's been several years now since I've seen him have a big win. Punting is invariably problematic. My physician phoned me on the 2nd of February to tell me that she was making arrangements for me to have some scans done at the nuclear medicine department. She explained they were to rule out possibilities. I said that was okay, but to steer away from the 10th of February because I'd be in Port Lincoln, and to keep away from the 14th to 19th because I was flying down to Hobart. I didn't even mention my Adelaide Writers Week commitments starting on February 27th. She simply replied, "You may have to cancel or postpone your arrangements." My immediate thoughts were about my non-refundable plane tickets, along with the embarrassment of contacting people to tell them I wasn't coming. Good people. People who booked me months ago, knowing I was reliable. I then thought about COVID and how we're alive in difficult times. Right now, there are no absolutes. And I guess most of us are acutely aware of that. We simply can't make long-term plans with any degree of confidence. Back in the autumn of 2020, Grace eventually got tired of my detailed shopping lists and let me open the gates. But the lockdown that she controlled gave me the benefit of creating 3 manuscripts, and I'll always be grateful to her for that. Plus, the broccoli was fabulous, the carrot sweet and juicy, the beetroot brilliant, and I'm still eating the Dutch creams. And though some might be inclined to say I'm a bit of a braggart, I reckon I grew the best cherry tomatoes in Semaphore. Thank you.